Hi everyone, and welcome to another Facebook Live from Enterprise in Barnsley. My name is Ben Hawley. I'm one of the business staff advisors with the Enterprise in Barnsley service. And today we're talking with our colleague, Stephen from the Regulatory Services team. So Stephen's a public health officer, is that correct? Is that your official title?
Public health officer. I do work in public health, in the public health team.
Okay, environmental health officer, do apologise. And basically today we've got some questions we're going to ask, and we're going to get his expert opinion on the best tips and tricks and best practices for opening your business back up now the lockdown is slightly easing, and making sure that when you do it, everything is safe. The first thing we will say on this one is that this is being broadcast on the 3rd of June. So anything that's come out after this is guidance. We will update our website, which is enterpriseinbarnsley.co.uk. And then the COVID section on there, we will update with anything that comes out after it. But as I say, everything we discuss in this video is correct as of the 3rd of June. Also, any links we refer to will be put in the comment section of the videos, whichever page you're watching it from, because we're broadcasting some 3 pages. And also it will be on the Enterprise in Barnsley website. So you go to the COVID section, and then you need to look for the if I remember what it's called, supporting your business in returning to work. There's a section on there. It's the first section that you come to. So the first thing, over to yourself really, Stephen, is so what's the sort of best practice should any business be following when they're looking to reopening after the current lockdown?
Right. Well, the good thing is that a few businesses have already opened. So a lot of food businesses have actually been open throughout all of this and have been learning the hard way. So you can learn from their success, and that's a really good thing. Also, the government has put 5 steps to becoming COVID secure on its website, which obviously the links will be available on our site, and that will help you to guide you through the process. So what they've done to be really helpful, they've provided the first 5 steps that you need to do, which are the risk assessment, encouraging hygienic behaviour, helping people to work from home, distancing, and managing risks. So provided you're following all of those, then you're doing the right thing. Now I can go into more detail on each of those if you like.
Yeah, I think that's the. So as I say, the first one you said I think was the risk assessment. So now a risk assessment to some businesses are bread and butter, but certain sole trades out there or individuals, they may not have done one before. So what kind of things is you recommended or is recommended to put in a risk assessment?
Yeah, well, examples of risk assessment have actually been produced and are available as well. But the main thing you're trying to think about is this is an infection, and you're trying to break that route of infection. So you're trying to think about what you need to do, practical steps to make sure your business is safe for your workers and your customers. So the first thing to do is involve the people who do the work and get them to help you with doing this, and making sure a reality check is carried out. Write down and record what you're actually doing. There is a template on the HSE website, also an example on the gov.uk COVID web pages, and those can be used. And basically you identify who could be at risk, what the risk is, and potentially with COVID is his of death, unfortunately. And then you look at what you're doing about it now, what you need to do about it, extra things that you might want to put in place, particularly things that might involve a bit of time to organise, who's going to do it, and you want to identify when it's going to be done by, and then you can sign it off. Share it with your workers. Share it with the people who it actually matters to. Don't forget to include something about with all this closing down in the hot weather, Legionnaires disease is something that could affect water systems. So there's some information on there on the website about that. Make sure you included that in any assessment, including about showers and stored water, etc. And a good idea. This is a tip for making sure that your workers and their families don't become too anxious. Is share what you've done in your risk assessment. Share it as wide as you can. Really, put it on your web pages. Give them a copy. You need to train your workers in what you've done on a risk assessment anyway.
Yeah. So very much a case of being open and working together with the rest of the workforce in your business.
That's
making
right.
sure everyone's happy with it, and taking
That's
those
right.
common sense approaches to making sure that you are making sure that the risk of infection and cross infection are minimal.
And if somebody points something out that they're concerned about and they don't think you've done enough, try not to take it personally. Try not to get defensive about it. Just think, right, okay, possibly I haven't done enough. I'll just need to explain that bit, or I think I've done enough. I need to explain it more, or I need to do a little bit more, and just include that and use it as positive feedback, because it's all useful. We all learn from other people.
And I'm assuming as well, this is not just like a one-time shot. Obviously, you need to do one to open, but I'm assuming best practice continue re-assess this and re-evolve it. If new threats come in, add that to the risk assessment at the bottom, and keep this as a living document rather than something you do and put in a cupboard on a shelf.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things about this is it's new to everybody. The scientific community are learning something new about it every day. The government are learning something new about it every day. There might be some great revelation. For instance, recently we discovered that one of the symptoms of COVID is not being able to smell or taste properly. That's something that wasn't initially publicised. So we need to keep things under review. We also might find that what we thought would work really well actually doesn't work very well, and people keep getting in the way of each other and things like this. If that happens, change your assessment, review it, and change your precautions, and make sure that it does work in practice.
Yeah. Okay. Lovely. So then point number 2 you mentioned is about the hygienic behaviour. So we all know about washing hands frequently, but what other basic hygiene things are there that the shops should be doing, or any business should be doing, really?
Well, okay. Even on the hands washing, just remember that people do tend to forget the fingertips and the thumb particularly, so just make sure that you start with washing those bits first and tell people about that. There's information on that on various websites. The other thing is cleaning contact points, places where people touch regularly. So things like door handles, things like the counter, the areas around the shop that people have been touching. Keep those cleaned. Ideally, you'd clean everything between every customer, but recognise that that's not necessarily practical. One thing that you could do as a good practice thing is to try and get your customers to sanitize their hands as they come into the shop, and that way anything that they do will be hopefully free from any virus. This is a viral disease, so it's the virus that we're trying to avoid. And obviously the other thing is, if people cough or sneeze, you would hope that they would take precautions sneezing to their elbow, but not everybody does. So if you do see somebody doing that, get out there with your sanitizer straight away and clean the area down. Okay. If you can take a view on whether or not to wear face masks, face coverings, but those are for preventing other people being breathing in the virus. And you might, if you decide to do it for one, you really need to do it for everybody who comes into the shop. As I say, the aim is really to break that route of infection, and to prevent the virus getting particularly to small thin membranes, your eyes, your nose, inside your lungs. That's what we're trying to avoid.
Right. Okay. So again, when you're talking about cleaning things on a regular basis, I'm assuming regular is a very flexible term depending on the frequency of traffic. So like I say, ideally in an ideal world, everyone would get a clean door handle every time they walk in. But if you've got something that's high traffic, sort of minimum once an hour, I'm assuming, as an absolute minimum?
Yeah,
Maybe more frequently?
Well, it really does. I mean, a lot of these things, it might seem like I'm going to be a bit vague, but really it depends on how your shop actually operates. If your shop is one where there's a constant stream of people, it must be at least every hour. If you only get browsers, you know, something like a furniture shop, you may not have so many people. It really isn't as important. It's just the key contact points like the door handles and any other places that people touch frequently.
Okay, not a problem. So then again, we are going to talk a bit more detail about shops and we're talking about generally here. Obviously, then one of the other things you mentioned was helping people to work from home. So again, I know a lot of people have done that already, but again, is there anything else you can talk to us about that?
Well, yeah, with the, I mean, obviously we speak to lots of businesses, and one of the things that keeps coming up is that people saying, oh, well, we're all getting back to normal. And they're forgetting that actually you should still, your first thing is to stay at home if you possibly do it. So that might mean that if, for instance, you've got a worker who needs particular protection or their family do, you could actually use them to work at home, and they can do things like ordering, they can do taking calls or emails about click and collect, something like that, and organising deliveries. So there are still things that people can do and work from home and be away from sources of infection.
Yeah, and the other thing to remember as well is obviously the furlough scheme still running now, and that's extended to the end of October. So that's 8% of a member of staff's wages covered by the government, and that's under the scheme. The other thing they're bringing in from the 1st of July regarding furlough is they're allowing, it was beforehand, either you're furloughed or you're not furloughed. They're now bringing it back where you can stage individuals furloughing, so you might bring them back for 20 hours rather than the full 37.5 hours, for example. So that's coming in from the 1st of July. So I think that'll give businesses a lot more flexibility to be able to bring people back into the workforce in a safe environment. Okay, so then the next point we're talking about is just looking at general distancing. So again, for some businesses, this could be fairly easy to deal with. In other ones, it could be quite difficult. So again, what we're thinking on, what's the thoughts on around this at the moment?
Well, distancing is really one of the key controls, along with the hygiene aspect. The distancing is the only other real control that we have, and that basically could mean that if you're in a shop where you can't get the 2 meter distancing, you're going to have to redesign your shop to some extent. You need to think about the position of where people wait, where the counter is, where whether you can operate a one-way system, what are the queuing arrangements, do you put markers on the floor, which is definitely recommended. Even in the street, we're quite amenable to working with you to make sure that markers are put on outside. You can talk to the council about that. Do talk to your neighbouring shops as well about how the arrangements are, particularly if you're likely to have overlapping queues or queues that are going to get close to each other.
Yeah.
One of the important things is to tell people what your arrangements are. Whatever arrangements you've designed, bearing in mind you've done your risk assessment that's identified what you're planning to do, tell people, and you need to put some sort of notice up to tell people how to use your shop and your arrangements. So try and keep them as similar as you can to other businesses, so that people don't get confused. And you know, if you can try and work with what does work, that's great. One tip that I've found, some businesses have found that families want to go around the shop together. That can create a lot of problems. So really try and avoid unnecessary people coming in shops, particularly a very small shop, unless you're only doing the one in, one out, where a whole family can come in, but they're the only people in the shop. Really, you want to encourage one, maybe 2 people at a time, rather than whole families. I appreciate it can be difficult where as a parent with children, when they're not at school and this sort of thing. But, you know, do your very best. And if somebody does come in with a family with the children, maybe you need to try and just make sure other people don't come in until they've left or have moved further around the shop, depending on the arrangements.
Yeah.
And don't forget that your workers need to distance from each other as well. That is really important. You know, workers can be, in fact, anybody can be a carrier of the virus without knowing and without showing any symptoms. So we have to sort of assume that everybody could be infected, even if they're not showing any signs and symptoms. And so, yeah, everybody needs to keep apart from each other.
Yeah. Okay. And then the fifth one of those signs is just general management of risk. So again, what's meant by general management of risk in terms of real?
Well, the guidance is actually saying you should do everything practical that you can be done. So if it can be done, then it must be done. It's stronger than the wording in the health and safety legislation, which says reasonably practicable, which sort of gives an idea that if it's difficult to do, maybe you don't have to do it. This doesn't say that. It's about everything that you can do, you should do to prevent the transmission. So hygiene, distancing. If it's not possible to achieve the 2 meters, you've got to really think very carefully about what you can allow. I know there's been talk about reducing the distance, etc., but every time the distance is reduced by ½ meter, that increases the risk by half. So, you know, while, you know, there is a lower risk, the further apart you are, you know, if you're a meter apart, there's a certain risk. If you're 1.5 meters, that's the same risk and a lesser half. 2 meters, another lesser half. So the other thing is we've got to really assume that this is going to be a long-term thing. I would suggest that you think about it as something that's going to last a year at least. Yeah. So it is worth making physical changes.
Yeah, this is not going to be something that blows over in a couple of weeks and everything goes back to normal. It is going to be something that's with us for a while. And, you know, obviously the businesses need to restart, but that's why these steps that they're taking now are so vitally important. So, yeah, make sure those plans are working for at least a year in planning. So non-essential retail are allowed to open as of the 15th of June. So in addition to the ones we've already talked about what else should retailers be doing to ensure the safety of their staff and their customers? Is there anything else you can tell us that we've not already touched on at all?
Well, I can give you some examples. Things like you've got to consider every shop is going to be different. This is the problem. I can't give you any hard and fast rule for calculating how many people should be in each shop. It really does depend on how your shop is laid out, how big it is, how many entrances it has. If you have 2 doorways, you can have an in and an out, but if you've only got the one, you know, you're stuck with having to try and perhaps make sure that you monitor the door or have somebody on the door, or you ask people to wait until the next person has left the shop. So remember that distancing is key. Think about in Australia, they use a model of a cube, an example of a cube. And if you think of you had a 4-meter cube around yourself, if you were walking around your shop, would you be 2 meters apart from another person as you were walking around? So that includes if you've got stairs, upstairs, you know, going up the stairs, if you've got split levels. Now, if you've got a barrier, like a shelf gondola, that will help. You can assume that the back of the gondola is the wall, if you like, as far as that's concerned. So that helps. So you might find that you have a long, thin shop where you can only allow one person in, one person out, and the queue has to be outside, and you invite people in. Another example might be you've got a small squarish shop, and you can put markings on the floor, and you might be able to allow 2 or 3 customers in, provided they sort of use the floor markings and keep distance apart while they're looking at the stock on the shelves. Or you might have quite a large floor area, or a clear flow through your shop, in which case you might be able to just allow people in as long as they're flowing. But do think about certain products attract more attention. I mean, obviously things like sanitizer, hand sanitizer at the moment, attracting a lot of attention, and people spend a lot of time looking at them. And so you tend to get these bottlenecks in the shop. So if you can try and space out the things which people tend to spend more time looking at, so that there continues to be a flow around the shop and you don't get everybody waiting for somebody, or being tempted to pass them far too close. That's a good idea as well.
Okay, so what about then sort of protecting the staff as well? So certainly in a retail environment, obviously they're coming in contact with a lot of people. That's the nature of the business. So how can you, business owners and shop owners, actually protect the staff more than they were doing before COVID-19?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you'll have noticed in a lot of retailers now that they're putting shields up, like a perspex screen or something to protect the person on the till. When you're doing restocking, it's best to do that when the shop is closed if you can. Make sure you use cleaner and sanitizer when you're going around the shop. Make sure you clean it frequently, but also at the end of the day as well. These to protect the customers and the staff, but obviously the staff are there all the time that the place is open, and so they're at much greater risk from what goes on in your shop than any customers. You can make your counter wider so that you've got more of a distance between you and the customer, or ask the customer to stand behind a certain line for most of the time while you're doing the transaction, and just maybe looking forwards at the point where they're paying. And then, of course, you've got the thing about money and how you pay. Contactless payment is obviously far less risky. And if you can try and educate your older customers, for instance, in how to use contactless, that would be really good. There are other things that can be done if people are using cash. You can have a system for doing that. And you mentioned about when staff are coming back off furlough or something like that, and they're maybe come back part-time, and some places tend to use staff in a sort of relief sort of role. So they go around, maybe if you've got more than one shop, you might have somebody going half the time in one shop, half the time in another shop, but half the time off. Try and avoid doing that as much as you possibly can, really. Try and keep the concept. I noticed with schools, they're thinking of going back at this time as well, and they've used the concept of a bubble. If you can be in a bubble with the same few workers, that's much better than mixing with all the workers in the company. If you've got 20 people, maybe 4 bubbles of 5 might be a good idea, or whatever it needs for that your particular shops. But don't swap them between as much as you can. Avoid that happening.
Well, that'll also give the company resilience as well, because again, the last thing you want is if somebody is infected to move between, for example, all 4 shops, and all 4 suddenly have no staff in them. Whereas if you keep them to one, you might have to shut one of the locations down, the other ones can remain open. So yeah, I think that's really good advice.
Yeah.
So I mean, with that, it's a case of certainly in some places, obviously workers won't necessarily be able to stay the 2 meters apart from each other, just in terms of physical. So what do they need to do? Do they need to wear face masks, or is there any other things they can be doing to protect themselves or protect the workers?
You really need to try to change your practices. If people can't stay 2 meters apart, to try and make it so that happens. If you can't do it by people being physically 2 meters apart, maybe then using different times, so that different people are working at different times, so that they're not doing things next to each other within the 2 meters. Face masks and any protective equipment are really your very, very last resort. And my colleagues and myself wouldn't be able to accept those as just the first thing that you do. You've got to really have done everything else, and I mentioned earlier, everything practical. So that might include moving your counter, changing your floor arrangement, changing your merchandising, so that it does allow for that separation. And if you have to carry large items or something like that, try and think of ways where people are facing in a different direction. So both people facing forwards, for instance, if you're carrying something long, if it's 2 meters long, obviously that's not a problem. But if it's less than that, a heavy item, and the other thing is obviously if you're doing things like click and collect, put them straight into a customer's car. Get the customer to open the boot and then put it either next to the boot or in the boot for the customer, and then you're not having too many interactions. So these are all things that can be done.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. And then you've mentioned briefly about queuing at the moment. So how can you manage queues both internally within the shop? What happens in terms of queuing on the street? You've already talked about working with the council, but again, is there some tips we can look at that side of things as well? So how do people manage queuing?
Yeah, you have to make the system as obvious and careful, as secure as possible. Try and make it clear to people what you expect. Putting markings on the floor is what's recommended. Putting barriers up if necessary. Signs, arrows, everything you can do to try and make it clear. One of the things that we've found with food shops is that often they're queuing down the last aisle, and there's other people trying to shop in that aisle, or they come down several aisles, and people are trying to look at the merchandise at the same time. That doesn't work. So you have to very carefully think about where you want your queue to be, and make sure that people aren't going to be trying to push past it. So think very carefully and try and do a bit of planning. The people in the queue obviously have to be 2 meters apart as well. So in a small shop, it may not be possible to do the queuing inside, and you just have to get them to do the queuing outside and then come in for whatever it is they want. A good example, my local pet shop, they actually have the queue outside. They invite the person in because it's a small, long, thin shop, actually, in this case. And they have a 2 meter square at the entrance, which the person stands in. There's a line which is 2 meters from the counter. The proprietor asks what you want, goes and fetches it for you, and brings them all to that point. If there's something you're not quite sure about and you want to go and have a look at it, then the shop staff stand back and let the person go and have a look, and then come back, and then they run it through till after that. So there's ways of getting around these things, but yeah, it might involve one member of staff at busy times actually marshalling the queue. That might be somebody's job.
Yeah, that's fair enough, not a problem. And obviously certain shops outside, they may end up being with other people or with other shops, and again, how do you recommend working in those situations?
Yeah, talk to your fellow shopkeepers, decide between yourselves how it's going to work, try and agree it as much as possible. The last thing we want is conflict between queues and between businesses. We're all in this together. None of us planned it. It's none of our faults. It's not something that anybody's done to cause it. We need to try and work with each other. But if there are problems, don't worry about calling the police. If there's people who are getting threatening, or you think are going to be violent, then the police are the people who can sort that out, and the police are aware of this possibility. Yeah, your thing is keep an active view on what's happening in all the queues.
Okay, fantastic. And then also, what happens at the moment of adjustments for people with disabled access still need to be made? Has that been suspended at the moment? what's the situation with people who've got additional needs to be able to access shops?
Yeah, you can't forget that you still need to make that those adjustments for the disabled and people who can't walk as easily as normal, or visually impaired. Particularly, in fact, visually impaired. Remember, they can't even see your signs, so you will need to talk to them. They will probably end up touching a lot more things than other people, even if they can are partially sighted. They will need to peer at things, pick things up to read the labels, this sort of thing. So do bear that in mind. They will take longer to get round. If you can make it so that your layout of your shop is such that people can pass, obviously that would be helpful. But if not, just make sure that you manage the flow of people around your shop. But yes, you still have to make those adjustments. That's still a legal requirement.
Okay, brilliant. And I suppose, finally, is there anything else you wanting to add at all that we've not covered off yet?
No, I think, I mean, we did talk about a little bit about money and handling money. Where it is really necessary to handle money, you can wash money these days with the plastic money that we have and the coins. You can sanitize it. You can leave it for 72 hours and then you will know that it's actually definitely clean. People can wear gloves when they're handling the money, but just remember that gloves are only to protect yourself from the physical touching of the thing. As soon as you touch your face with a gloved hand, you might as well be using your hand. So try and avoid that. And they're a form of protective equipment, so should be only used in last resort. An example I heard of in a chip shop was that they got their customers to put the money into a takeaway pot. They could then see exactly how much it was, and they could give the right change by putting that down in another pot in that case. And then those can be cleaned in between. That worked for them. It might be that you can think of a better system, but try and avoid touching people when you're handling change, and at the very least, use some sort of a sanitizer, hand sanitizer. You can give that to your employees and get them to use it between customers, between handling cash. The squirty bottles are obviously the better ones, and if you really swish, you'll have the ones that are hands-free. At the moment, they're like gold dust, so maybe that's something to plan for in future. But definitely get something. Okay,
brilliant. Right, well, thank you for that, Steve. Really appreciate your time to go and talk to us about this today and talk the options through. As I mentioned at the start of the video, this session was broadcast live on the 3rd of June. So if you're watching this after then, just double check that none of the regulations have changed since then, because obviously we're not clairvoyant, we can't see what's coming in the future. But as of the broadcast right now, all of the information is accurate and correct. If you want any more information at all, the link should be in the comments for this video, but you'll also be able to find it all on enterprisingbarnes.co.uk, and then click on the COVID-19 page and you'll see it on there. We will be doing more of these Facebook Lives. Is there any particular topics you want us to cover going forwards, either COVID-19 related, just general business related? Please do let us know. And we will look forward to seeing you at the next one. So thank you very much. See you later. Goodbye.
Thank you. Very welcome.